Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into one of the absolute most profound leaps of faith in human history. We're talking about that exact moment when value officially separated from physical commodities and became, for the very first time, an abstract promise. And look, this isn't just some dusty ancient history lesson. This is the absolute foundation of how we value literally everything in our modern world.
Because, think about it, for millennia, money was strictly defined by its physical weight and material. I mean, imagine hauling around these heavy, cumbersome chests of copper, silver, and gold. It was incredibly dangerous to transport, not to mention totally limited by the actual material you could mine. But the moment we freed money from those heavy constraints and shifted to an abstract representation, wow, it completely unlocked unprecedented economic scale. Suddenly, money is lightweight, it's highly efficient, it's endlessly scalable, and it's based entirely on one massive concept: trust.
So let's look at the logistical leap that started it all, right in ancient China. Now, the situation during the Tang Dynasty was just a total logistical nightmare. You had merchants trying to transport massive quantities of heavy copper coins across China's vast territories. And it was a massive vulnerability. You've got bandits, rough terrain, and just the sheer crushing weight of the metal making trade almost impossible. So to survive, these incredibly resourceful merchants invent what they called fei qian, or flying cash. It was just an ingenious workaround using paper certificates. A merchant could basically drop off their heavy metal coins in one location, get a certificate, and simply withdraw that equivalent value in a totally different city. No hauling required. It was the ultimate logistical hack. And what's fascinating is how fast this evolved. So it starts as this private merchant fix in the Tang Dynasty, right? But by the time we hit the Song Dynasty, starting around 960 CE, the government realizes the absolute utility of this system, and they formalize it into something called jiaozi. This is a huge milestone. We are talking about the very first state-backed paper currency in history. Just like that, a simple, lightweight paper receipt transforms into an official, state-sanctioned claim on stored wealth. To give you an idea of just how far ahead of the curve China really was, let's fast forward a bit to the 13th century. The Venetian traveler Marco Polo visits, and he is completely floored. He records an observation of just absolute astonishment. He could not believe he was seeing people happily trading pieces of paper as if they were solid gold. That concept simply didn't exist in Europe at the time. To Polo, it honestly must have looked like pure magic. Which brings us to the next big evolution, the network of promises. Because as global trade naturally expanded over the centuries, money had to adapt again. We go from exchanging tangible value locally to actually exchanging international promises across borders. A great example of this is from the Islamic caliphates, starting as early as the 8th century. They invented something called the SEK, and yes, that is the direct origin of our modern word, check. It proved that massive amounts of funds could effortlessly cross borders using nothing but a written promise. No dangerous, heavy caravans of gold, just a single piece of paper carrying the absolute weight of a merchant's word. And this idea spread like wildfire. By the Middle Ages, big Italian merchant families, like the famous Medici, they basically perfected this concept into the bill of exchange. Picture this. You deposit funds with a banker in Florence, travel all the way up to Bruges, carrying nothing but a written commitment, and then redeem that paper at a destination bank in Gertner. This created an incredibly powerful system of credit. It totally bridged the gap between the resources you have now and your future income. Basically, it allowed economic activity to just explode far, far beyond the limits of whatever hard cash happened to be available. But moving into our next dynamic, trust, taxes, and inflation. For paper money to actually work on a massive state or global scale, it needed a much, much firmer foundation than just merchant handshakes. I mean, it required absolute trust. Because a private merchant's promise only really goes as far as their personal reputation, right? But governments can step in and completely transform that fragile, localized trust into a highly stable system. How do they do it? Well, they hold the unique power to levy taxes and enforce laws. So by declaring that a specific piece of paper currency is valid for paying your taxes, the government forces universal acceptance. They basically guarantee that the paper in your hand has real, undeniable value, simply because everyone absolutely needs it to pay their dues to the state. But as you can probably guess, this incredible power introduces a massive risk. It forces us to ask a really critical question. What actually happens when a government starts issuing way more promises on paper than its physical economy can support? Well, both the Song and Yuan dynasties learned the answer the hard way. They over-issued paper money without having sufficient economic backing, and it led straight to severe inflation and, eventually, a total collapse in public confidence. The paper reverted to just being, well, paper. It is a wildly fascinating historical lesson on a very delicate balancing act between economic flexibility and monetary discipline. And it's exactly the same tightrope that every single central bank in the world is still walking today.
Now, let's look at the birth of modern banking.
Transitioning over to 17th century Europe, this is where the final puzzle pieces of our modern financial system really click into place. In London, there was this very organic, gradual evolution. First, you have folks starting to deposit their heavy physical gold with local goldsmiths just for safekeeping. And in return, those goldsmiths issue lightweight paper receipts for that gold. But here is where the magic really happens. The public quickly realizes, hey, it's way easier to just trade these paper receipts directly in the marketplace, instead of hauling the actual metal back and forth to buy things. The receipt itself literally became the money.
And this grassroots practice didn't stay small for long. It was eventually formalized by massive institutions. In the 1660s, Sweden's Stockholmsbanken actually took the leap and issued some of the very first European banknotes. Then, soon after, in 1694, the Bank of England is established. They step up and provide this incredibly stable institutional framework that officially backed all these circulating paper notes with actual precious metal reserves locked away in their vaults.
This whole evolution brilliantly illustrates exactly why paper ultimately won the battle over metal. See, a fixed money supply is strictly constrained by the physical gold and silver available. If you don't mine more, you just don't have more money. It's that simple. But paper systems, they created an elastic money supply. This means the money supply could literally expand to meet the needs of a growing, booming economy. And that is a feature that a fixed pile of gold sitting in a vault could never, ever achieve.
Bringing us to our final takeaway: the symbolic leap. As we wrap up this explainer, we really need to take a step back and look at what this grand historical transition actually means for us today, right now. This transition to paper was not just some convenient tech upgrade for merchants. It fundamentally redefined what money actually is. It separated value completely from physical substance. It embedded our economic wealth entirely into institutions and our collective trust. That symbolic leap is what facilitated the explosive expansion of global trade, and it laid the absolute foundation for today's purely digital financial systems.
So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. The next time you pull out your smartphone, open up your digital banking app and glance at that balance, ask yourself, what do those numbers really represent? Are you actually looking at money, or are you simply looking at the latest, purely digital evolution of an ancient Chinese promise? Thanks for exploring this with me today, and keep questioning the invisible systems we rely on every single day.